We talked about, I don't know, 4 years ago, you had like a baby. How old's your child? That can be our
He's 6 now. That was our second child. Yeah.
okay, maybe it
So
was like
it's
five,
even
6 years
longer.
ago.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. It was a while
Yeah.
ago because you were in a spot of like talking about health behaviors and exercise, and you were feeling a bit of like you were a fraud.
No, absolutely. Yeah. That's probably my highest level of fraudness in my health behavior change career. Yeah.
Yeah, but when you were a new parent.
Yeah. Well, when we had our second, uh, yeah, I also had some increased job demands and things like that. And my health habits went into the basement. Yeah, I wasn't exercising or eating well or anything for as a health behavior change researcher. Yeah.
It's so hard to be the public face of health and exercise, and then you're not doing it on your end. And that discrepancy can feel terrible. And most people that have newborn children or have increased demands at work, those are the moments when our health behaviors kind of go by the wayside. We stop exercising, we don't eat as well. It's sort of normal.
Yeah, I think that's 100% true, and I come by this work honestly, right? So it's kind of always been a struggle for me to focus on healthful food choices and being physically active. I already come to the table with that sense that that's a real struggle. But then, when I go through periods that are really difficult, it helps remind me and humanize what I study because I can trace my own habits across, let's say, the past 10 years and watch them kind of go up, down, largely based on just what my life circumstances were at the time, which kind of reminds me, that what we teach people is often a small part of the equation. You're going to run into things and kind of wax and wane on how you approach your health. And I think that's totally normal and okay. The goal is never to be perfect with any of this, right? It's just about having a direction and then getting back on track when you can.
Um, well, I'm airing this episode in the new year. You're still motivated and back on track. And
Yeah.
one of the reasons why we don't move have to do with our own inner barriers: shame, dread, stigma, embarrassment, guilt. I mean, all sorts of things that on the inside. But then there's also external barriers, things like, you have a baby and how are you going to fit it in when you have all these other things that you're doing? And it's a time of year when people are thinking about getting back on track with moving
Yeah.
their bodies. What do you see in the research are the biggest barriers to people moving their bodies?
It's multifaceted and there's so many barriers. You can start with stuff that have just absolutely nothing to do with the person at all. Just go to the environmental piece where, lived environments have been arranged for 50, 60, 70 years now to discourage people just walking around,
Mm-hmm.
or using a bike or something like that, right? So there's like structural barriers in place that prevent people from just having easy access to getting some activity in just for the purpose of commuting somewhere or something like that, right? So you can go to that level, but like you're saying, there's a lot of circumstantial related things. People who are low on time because they're working a lot and have a lot of family demands, or they're a caretaker, kids, all those kinds of things. And then it trickles down all the way to the internal. That's sort of the piece I tend to focus on in my work, of course. But that's, again, a very wide range of issues there, right? So you have sort of emotionally related things. There's some of those you mentioned. But you have a lot of cognitive related things as well. There's can be like cognitive rigidity about thoughts about how exercise needs to be conducted for it to be exercise. One of the things
Mm-hmm.
we deal with a lot is just people's belief about, well, I don't have enough time to do this, so I'm not going to do anything. Actually, if you just moved for 10 minutes, it'd be great, or 5 minutes. But there's sort of people have sort of different levels of cognitive rigidity around how this can be done or what's worth it or things like that. When they study this, people's actual expectation of how they're going to feel while they're engaging in activity typically doesn't match how they actually feel if you ask them while they're engaging in activity. So that's another barrier where people expect it to be a worse experience than it is, and that serves as a barrier to starting in the first place. So there's all those kind of things, and then there's a motivational aspect that I think is really important. If people don't really have any sense of how engaging in physical activity actually provides benefits to them, ongoing benefits, and how those benefits affect how they're able to live their life in a way that's more satisfying or meaningful to them, then I think that that's a potential huge barrier. To some degree, you have to be aware that sleeping better, your energy levels better throughout the day, that's helping how you perform at work, that's helping you be a more patient partner, you're able to hang longer with the kids in an activity. If you don't have a sense of like that's part of what's going on here, then there should be motivational factors that just aren't present when you have all these other choices to make that could be not exercising. So it's just a lot of things.
Hi, I'm Dr. Dinah Hill. Thank you so much for joining me with Your Life in Process. And if you want more, if you're interested in applying these processes to your daily life, join me at my membership, More Life in Process. At More Life in Process, you will get meditations for you to practice at home. You'll get extra bits from the episode that maybe got recorded after the fact. You're going to get PDFs and handouts, things that you can use to apply your daily practice to your life. And I can't wait to see you there. $5 a month, $50 for the year. You can go to yourlifeinprocess.com to sign up. I have a hard time with the environmental contextual ones as well. It's an inner barrier. I'm like, I got all the tools for that.
Yeah.
I feel like this is an ACT therapist playground. We can work with that. But the ones that are actually the harder ones, which is the soup that we're sitting in, the sedentary soup. And I interviewed someone named Pilar Gerasimo a while back, who I loved because the title of her work is The Healthy Deviant. And her whole angle is that we live in this evolutionary mismatch between how our bodies and brains are designed and the environments that we're in. And in order to be healthy, you actually have to be a deviant. So that means you have to do weird things. You have to look like an oddball. That means like at the airport, you're not sitting there quietly with your magazine. You're like doing circles around the thing, passing the same attendant times up and down the aisle of the airplane, and you're a deviant. Which I've kind of, as I get older, I'm like, I don't really care. I'll be a deviant. But so there's an element of that, but there's also just the reality of, for some people, walking outside their door means concrete and unsafe places to walk and really unpleasant. Like, I don't really want to walk along this sidewalk with cars coming at me and honking horns. That's not an enjoyable thing. So how would you address some of those barriers where actually the cost of a gym, the walking in your neighborhood isn't safe or isn't actually enjoyable, those kind of external types of barriers, before we get to the fun internal ones? We can do those all day. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to answer that, but I first have to just say with your you have to be a deviant idea, which I love, by the way, because it really fits how I see health in general, because it's not just activity, it's food too. Like our biology and environment are interacting in a way where you have to be strange to not gain weight consistently over time, right? There has to be something abnormal about you to not be gaining weight, right? So, but I feel like it's the same thing with physical activity. But I just want to say that I have been that crazy looking person in an airport waiting for my plane to board, doing laps up and down the corridors. That's where I have the time for it. So to your point about, how do you deal with these systemic issues? I think it's really hard, and I think it's another thing where like health disparity shows up, right? Because if you're living in a relatively safe suburb, you can just walk out of your house and just walk around, right? And just pick a loop, do that loop and come back. One of the things we try to do, this has nothing to do with ACT, right? This is sort of nuts and bolts physical activity intervention type stuff, is you try to find stuff that people can do in their homes. There's a lot of things that I could do without that technology has brought us, but it's brought us things like YouTube and things like that, where you can actually find really nice free resources of a variety of different kinds to get you active in your home. It's not a perfect solution, right? Because you want to have people have multiple options available.
Yeah. And I would add to that is, what environmental control do you have over your space that would encourage movement? You don't have a lot of control over the lack of sidewalks or some of the environments that we're in that really discourage movement, but you do have control over whatever your space is to set it up.
Yeah.
And that can be everything from in your office, if you have a yoga mat that you just leave out like a piece of furniture, right?
Mhm.
You have other types of furniture. Why not have a piece of furniture that's a yoga mat? If the yoga mat is there, you may be more willing to get on the floor and do whatever your preferred movement on that yoga mat is. We have a lot of open spaces that we set up in our house on purpose, because if there's an open space, your body isn't going to be forced to be in one physical form, one repetitive physical form. So if you sit in the same chair all day, your body will be in the position of a chair all day. But if you have an open space and you're sitting on the floor, maybe you're standing, or maybe you're playing games on the floor with your kids, you're naturally going to be moving more. So just thinking about that too, how you set up your environment. My husband, every morning, he grinds his own coffee with this like hand grinder. It's like a camping grinder. I don't know, but he walks around the house. It takes him like 3 minutes or so to grind it, maybe 5 minutes even, to grind his coffee, walking around the house, checking in with the kids, checking in with me, grinding, grinding, grinding. And I'm like, I was wondering the other day, I was watching him do. I was like, I wonder how that impacts his hand strength over time. And if he's grinding
Oh
his
yeah.
coffee and his grip strength, and he switches hands because one hand gets tired, right? Little things like that can make a big difference, and we don't think about that. So environmental control doesn't have to be out of your control. A lot of it is, but taking back control. And yeah, YouTube is great for um,
Yeah.
having other people lead you, but changing our paradigm around what movement could be as well.
I love what you said there for a couple of reasons. Because one, it leverages everything we know about like making your own attempts to influence your personal environment, right? Like there's a lot of good data on stuff like if you put the shoes in the car, you're more likely to stop at the gym. Like if you prep that the night before, stuff like that. Same thing with food, right? If you prepared a healthy food and it's at the front of the fridge, you're more likely to eat it, right? So it leverages that, but it also is very empowering because you're saying, this is your space, right? How do you want to use it? How do you want to make that space work for you? And I do think with anything with health behavior change, for a very long period of time, I believe it's been too prescriptive, right? Where we're trying to tell people what to do. And I think it works much better when you empower people to make choices, right? And that's what you're saying. It's like, hey, this is your space. How do you want to set it up to make it more likely and a more pleasant choice for you to do something that you find important to do? So I like
Yeah.
that a lot.
Another aspect of that is, we've all been to the friend's house, or maybe it's been our own house, where you're put the treadmill in your bedroom thinking this is gonna, and all of a sudden the treadmill becomes the holder of all your clothes, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the boxes that are placed on the treadmill.
Yeah.
When my kids were young, I learned this strategy from some parenting coach that said only put out a third of your kids' toys and hide 2/3. And then
Mm.
every month or so, swap in the third and put out and then all of a sudden it's like Christmas again. It's like my birthday, wow, all these new toys. And because your kids will naturally habituate to the
Yeah.
toys and they'll just get sick of them, right? And so doing that with your environment every few months, switching things up in a way that you are bringing in a new context that encourages you to be a healthy deviant in moving more or eating healthier in your environment. That may be changing the type of fruit that you have in the bowl, or moving things around in your space, putting the yoga mat out. But then after a while, maybe you put the yoga mat out and you bring in the big ball, and you have the big ball in your office and you play with that for a while. Okay, so environmental control, but let's go to some of the more psychological barriers.
Mm.
And that I'm actually interested in asking you about, because it's a motivational barrier that I've seen show up, which has to do with Ozempic.
Mm-hmm.
Ozempic.
Okay. Interesting.
Ozempic. It's like the new, not only for
Yeah.
folks that have obesity, but also just folks that want to lose a few pounds. Sometimes when you start using a medication that can help you regulate your blood sugar or maybe lose weight, I'm not pro Ozempic or anti Ozempic, but all of a sudden your motivation to exercise might go down, because why would you want to exercise if you can just take a pill that can help you lose weight? What would be your intervention around something like that? If someone comes in and says, I don't need to.
I had wondered if this GLP-1 meds were going to come up. So,
Of course.
yeah, how could they not? It's really like dominating anything that's in the health weight domain at this point. That's very interesting. So I have two different answers. Like first, I'll address the GLP ones, but then I'll address the issue you talked about there. Very strangely, with these GLP-1 meds so far, and this is I caution to say, we're very early days with the data on these meds, so we have to be pretty careful because it's going to take some time to unfold to really understand the wide-ranging effects they have, the mechanisms they work on, what the long-term impact is, and all that stuff is still to come. However, there is some very strange, I guess I'll call it strange, data on the opposite of what you're saying. That folks taking these medications are finding themselves exercising more. We don't know why. We don't know why. There's some hypotheses you might guess about them that have to do with frontal lobe functioning and acting on reward mechanisms and sort of making other options for seeking reward more on par with previous options that dominated, like food and things like that. So I don't know, but that specific med to motivation deficit connection may be there for some people, but it might actually be the opposite for some people. Now, let's just assume that the person in front of us, they're having the problem that you said, which is they are losing motivation at that point. I'm a big proponent in why would you do this if it's not working for you, right? It doesn't make sense to do this if it's not working for you in some way. Even if you say, I just want to be more healthy, that's not enough for me as a clinician. I need to know why. So what about being more healthy would unlock in your life that is really important or meaningful to you? We have to go beyond that because that's just a very diffuse idea. If someone's taking Ozempic and they're losing weight, then it sounds like de facto, the motivational factor there in part was to lose weight. First of all, exercise has very little role in weight loss. It has a very strong role in weight loss maintenance, but has very little effect on weight loss if you look at the data. Almost no effect. So that as a goal in and of itself wouldn't be one I would sign on for. What could this be about for you? What are some benefits you can get from this, and how would that empower you in at least one domain that's important to you in your life? Because if it's not there, I would say, okay, there's nothing there. Why do this? For the vast majority of people will connect to something important, even if it's longevity, being around for high performance at work, or relating better in relationships, or having the energy to do activities they're interested in, not falling asleep on the couch at 6 p.m. Like that matters to most people, right? So I would try to organize around that as the motivational factor as opposed to anything having to do with like weight or shape.
Mm-hmm. One of the questions that I'll do, the miracle question from solution focused therapy, which is, I think it's been a little bit of adopted into ACT, the miracle question, is I'll ask people, okay, let's look at these important domains of your life, your relationship with your partner. If I could wave a wand and the miracle happened and you were in really good physical shape and you were exercising on a regular basis, what would happen to your relationship with your partner? Now, let's look at you with your stress at work. If I could wave a magic wand, you're in physical shape, you're exercising every day, what would happen to this? And just kind of go through domain by domain, your relationship with your own self, and in the domain of your relationship with yourself, how would that change? And inevitably, there'll be some domain that shows up that people will say, yeah, that would actually make a really big difference. And then you have something to work with. That's not, I don't know, all-cause mortality. I don't wake up in the morning and go for a run because I'm going for all-cause mortality reduction. Like, it just doesn't do it for me.
Unless you've had a cardiac event recently, right?
Yeah.
No one else does, though.
Yeah. And even if you had a cardiac event that lasts for like 6 months post-cardiac event, and then you're back to the basics, it is helpful to think about the motivating piece. So, we're moving out of the realm of Ozempic and into the realm of just motivation and values.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a clear sense of motivation, a clear sense of the values that are driving that for you, then the nature will be that you will take the easier, softer way to not exercise and not move. I was going to ask you about this because I was wondering if you know if there's about the research on this, because I was trying to dig it up. That I was talking with Julie Kangas, she's at UC San Diego, and she studies yoga and the benefits of yoga. And she said that there's some research that shows that evolutionarily, the reason why exercise is really uncomfortable, but once we start, because we don't want to expend extra energy, but once we start moving, it actually it's just sort of with your expectation thing. It actually starts to feel good. Our
Yeah.
dopamine kicks in. All the good neurochemicals start to kick in part because if we were moving for evolutionary reasons, there'd be a reason why we're moving.
Mm-hmm.
And so our body would want to tell us, okay, keep doing this. It's good for you. Whether you're running away from a tiger or you're going to get food or you're trying to find shelter, you need to keep that going. Do you
Yeah.
know if that's accurate?
So I'm not well versed in the evolutionary aspect of it, but that makes absolute 100% sense. And you can even put the cognitive piece on top of this, right? We're kind of incentivized not to move, right? Store the energy, don't burn it off. We might need it. We never know when the next meal is going to be, right? But then when you have to move, you get the dopamine flood and all that kind of stuff, right? To get away from the tiger, right? This all makes sense. But then I'll even layer on top of that the cognitive piece that I talked about, which is you misremember what that experience was like. You remember that as negative because your body doesn't want you to move again, right? We got to store the energy. If we're not in danger, we should just be kind of sitting here and not doing a whole lot. So I actually think that fits 100% with what I know about the literature, even though I'm not well versed in the kind of evolutionary theory part of it. I think that makes a ton of sense.
All righty, I hope you're doing something physically active while listening to this. And if you're not, here's a really simple thing that you can do right now. Katie Bowman talks about 3 macronutrients that humans evolved to do. The 3 of them are, one is hanging, the other is squatting, and the third is walking. And so whenever I get a chance, I squat, whether I'm waiting in line, this is totally healthy deviant, whether I'm waiting in line or I'm at the airport or in between clients, sometimes I'll just get down into a squat and check my email on my phone. Really good for your hips. It builds mobility and strength in your legs. We are not squatting enough. Humans were designed to squat. And then if you can, find a tree branch or even your doorway that you can grab onto and hang your body from. That is really good for upper body strength, for grip strength, and also, as I'm finding with my scoliosis, it's really good for your spine health. And then finally, walk. Every chance you can get, walk. Walk, 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 walk. It's one of the best things that you can do for your body. All right, back to the episode. So let's address some of those cognitive barriers. The brain that's telling you, don't move. The thoughts that come in the way. And you know, my audience is pretty well versed with ACT and diffusion and all the thank you mind kind of strategies.
Yeah.
What do you see is actually really working for folks? If you know, we wake up in the morning, you just don't want to. Or you haven't, maybe for some folks, they haven't been moving for a long time and getting started again just feels, mind says all sorts of things about that, of how terrible it's going to be. What's your go-to that seems to work?
There's a few things, but I think one thing I was granted permission to borrow from Evan Foreman at Drexel and Megan Buttrin in particular. Most of the time what's happening is there are 2 things present. There's a desire to be active or more active, and then there's something else present about not wanting to be active, obviously. Often cognitively that gets presented as where with one experience is present, the other one can't happen, right? I want to take a walk, but it's too hot outside, right? And so you have that hot outside means cannot take a walk, right? Mm-hmm. And this is the usual way of like how our mind throws these things at us is like, want to do this, but. So there's always a but in there, right? But I don't have enough time, but whatever it is, but I'm too tired, all those things. One of the things that is very consistent that I borrowed from that group is this idea of changing but to end. You simply just adjust it to say, I want to take a walk and it's hot outside. I want to do the yoga routine tonight and I'm tired. I want to do the stairs at work and I feel pretty busy, right? And once you do that, if you practice that, it opens up, right? Because now you see there's 2 things present. One doesn't cancel the other out, and now you have a choice, right? And you don't have to make the exercise choice every time, right? But at least now you can see the choice, right? The way our mind gives it to us, there is no choice. So creating space for these things to coexist so that sometimes you could choose the choice even when you noticed you felt tired, for example. Mm-hmm. So notice barriers when they show up. as what they are and not what they say they are, to use ACT language.
Mm-hmm. There's a great book called Both and Thinking by Marianne Lewis. And she writes about shifting this paradigm whenever we're faced with a paradox. Because what we want to do with the paradox is we want to resolve the paradox by solving one side. And really, more often than not, it's a both and that's where creativity happens when we're in the both place. She's looking at it from like a business angle, from like how Legos became super successful as they took a both and perspective in terms of their growth. But for us, we do, our mind just wants to feels like we have to choose, and that we don't have to choose. We can choose both. We can choose being cold and going for a walk, or being hot and going for a walk. And when you choose both, you also just are making room for the part of you that's hot.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's not even the thought that it's going to be hot. We don't even know. So many times our mind says and expects. I had a friend that was dreading. She was taking eight kids to amusement park, 8 teenagers. And there was all this talk about how hard it's going to be, blah, 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 blah. And then I text her as a good supportive friend, how did it go? And she's like, it was great. There was no lines, no drama. This is what our mind does. It always gives us often gives us the scary story.
Overactive alarm system, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's always projecting out the worst possible outcome, and having us relate to it as if that's definitely what's going to occur. Yeah. And sometimes it does occur, but sometimes it doesn't.
Let's talk about another barrier, which is a really common one, which has to do with technology and how technology is so addictive. So it's just so much easier to pick up your phone and scroll first thing in the morning. And then your 30 minutes that you could have used to go exercise, you've spent scrolling. Or maybe if you were wanting to do that in the afternoon, you'd rather just come home and plop on the couch and, go on your phone. It seems that there's the technoference, not only in our relationships with technology, but it really does interfere with our movement. And then there's a whole thing around technology and how it's changing our bodies, right? Our heads are forward and our shoulders are slumped and our scapulas are sticking out because we aren't really staying aligned as we could be because we're hunched over our phones. But how do you work with folks around that are seeing their phone use as a real barrier to them moving more?
Yeah. I relate to what you just said because I feel like I'm hunched over trying to get in the camera frame properly right now. Having that experience. No. Everything, it's a whole system here. The mic's in a certain place. Yeah, it's all going to work out.
Jason, I'm going to pause you there because I want to show you. Here's my couch. Here's where I'm sitting.
Oh, wow.
I have a portable table so I can move it wherever I need to move it so that I can move my body in different spots. And I sit on the floor, and I've been in multiple different positions during this conversation. So I've been cross-legged. My knees have been to the side. If I were to, in a little bit, I could go up on my knees. And that way, when I'm spending my hour with you, my body's not hurting. So this is part of the healthy deviant thing where we think because I'm on an hour interview in front of Zoom that I need to be hunched over and make sure my frame's in the right spot.
It's an excellent point. I'm learning on this podcast. I'm very grateful for that.
Ditch the chair, Jason.
Seriously. No, seriously.
Back to technology. Technology, it's doing its job right now in terms of forcing our positions into bad positions. But yeah.
So I do find the issue hard, first of all. There's a lot of ways that you can get gamified and devicified with respect to health goals and meeting those goals. And a lot of these devices will track things. And, they want to have that phone all the time. Great. Let's get a lot of information in front of them and get them interested in checking boxes and getting fake rewards on the phone or whatever, closing circles and all that kind of stuff. Let's use it to the degree we can. So I try to co-opt it as part of the motivation to engage and as a way of providing a lot of feedback around what they're doing in that domain. I don't think that solves the problem you're talking about. It's just one thing you can do to try to can't beat them, join them sort of a way of approaching it.
Yeah, well, it's all about flexibility, right? So one idea is if you can't beat them, join them. That would be a sort of like rolling with the resistance. Don't make technology bad. And then sometimes it's actually maybe you need more environmental controls. Having technology not just be free for all. This is the same kind of stuff that you would do with food in your house. You don't
Yeah.
just have donuts on the counter or cookies on the counter all the time. There's a place and time. There's a place for those. And then tech can set certain times that you may be using it, and you may want to use your technology as a reward. That's what I do. I'm like,
Mm,
I have to meditate before I get to go on Instagram.
right.
And
Yeah.
so and that's just how I set it up. So I meditate first, and then I go on and I make my post. And then you can also use technology with temptation bundling, where you use it as a reward while you move. So I listen to
Mm,
my favorite books while I'm exercising, and there's good research on that in terms of temptation bundling, putting technology with your movement, so that you're more, you can watch your favorite show if you're at the gym or whatever. So there is ways that I think you could do some environmental design to help. And then in terms of not worth it time,
right.
it's a waste, and that
Yeah.
you're wasting time. And what would be a more meaningful use of your technology?
Yeah. Definitely accessing things you like on technology while putting yourself in motion is great. When people can really connect to that of like, oh, I like to get on the bike and just knock this show out that I'm really interested in. It's like awesome. That's the
Yeah.
best. But like you're saying, I do think like if you're working with someone individually, then you can really have a bigger conversation about like what role do you want this to have in your life, and like is it kind of staying within that role, or does it seem to be creeping outside of that and affecting other things that you care about, right?
How do you work with people who feel guilty about taking time to exercise? Maybe you felt that a little bit when you were a father with a young. Now you have two kids, and you have a partner that if you go out and you go for a run or something like that, you're leaving your partner with these two kids, or maybe you don't see your partner very much and you feel guilty if you're going to come home late and just leave again. How do you work with that feeling of, if I'm exercising, then it means, this might be a both and question, but then it means that I am doing something for myself that's not helpful to others. I feel guilty about it.
I actually think it's a pretty common experience, especially with someone who's a primary caregiver. And often I'll see people in my studies later in life, these 60s, who are basically saying like, I'm always last, like I just don't, it's always been everyone else's needs. And then if there's anything left, maybe me, but probably not. Like that's kind of been the approach. So I do think what you're saying is a very common experience. And then if someone orients that way as their value, then taking time for themselves can induce guilt. That's absolutely true. I try to build on the idea of if really what you want to do is give to other people in your life, right? Whether that's time and taking care of needs of kids, or it's having quality time with your partner. Even if it seems like giving all your time is the right move, you're giving less of yourself, right? If you're not taking adequate care of yourself to meet your own needs, your own psychological needs, your own physical needs, then you're just not going to be operating the way you want to be operating in all those different aspects of your life. If the caregiver takes care of themselves, they're able to caretake better. When I engage in this behavior on a regular basis, I have just, I operate at a higher level, whether it's my energy, my patience, my whatever it is, my understanding, my ability to empathize. And I can see that's directly impacted by me regularly taking care of my own needs. And I think once that's contacted, the guilt piece, it may still show up from time to time, but its impact of it gets lessened because it's a historical artifact as opposed to it's actually their experience of their reality is.
One of the ones that I struggled with a lot. And part of the way that I have worked with that guilt, there's sort of three things that I've done. One is oftentimes looking at guilt as, Marsha Linehan's justified versus unjustified guilt. There's justified guilt. If you're doing something that is harmful to someone, it's a motivating emotion to motivate you to repair, right? But feeling guilty about doing something that is for you, or caretaking for your body, or what is more in the unjustified guilt realm. And so sometimes it's doing the opposite action. Like actually
Mm-hmm.
doing the thing that makes you feel guilty over and over again until that you just get used to it,
Mm-hmm.
like the toys in the playroom, or you just learn how to act with guilt there. And that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
powerful, right? If I can
Mm-hmm.
do things that I feel unjustified guilt around, but I can still continue to do them, then I have a lot more freedom in my behavior. Then the other thing that I've done around guilt is changing my paradigm around what exercise has to look like. Because for a long time, it was exercise is you go to a gym and you get on a machine for 45 minutes and then you drive back home. And when I had kids, there was, yeah, that's not happening. Like, in order for, like, that means I have to go, we live 15 minutes from anywhere. So that'd be an hour and a half that I'd be away. That didn't seem possible. And so it was, how can I move more
Mm-hmm.
with the people in my life that I would feel guilty leaving? And when they were really little, that was them climbing all over me while I was doing my morning routine, and then it was involving my husband in it, and we were throwing like medicine balls back to each other while our kids, were hanging out in the backyard. But maybe you need to change your paradigm, and if you're feeling guilty about taking time for yourself, look at places where you could also, the third thing is, how could you move together? Your family needs to move as well, as opposed to it being some kind of just this very like this modern day weird thing around movement that we have to like separate ourselves, go run in place on machine next to other people running in place on
Mm-hmm.
machine, and then go back home and sit for the rest of the day. I talked to with another researcher, and she's like, "Oh, that's what's been researched. We don't have
Right.
research on movement throughout your day and moving with others and going for walks, walking
Yeah.
to the ice cream shop and walking back. We don't have that kind of
Yeah.
research." But even if the research is not there yet, it may be more doable for folks to do that type of movement.
Yeah. But we do have research on sedentary time. And
There you
what
go.
you're saying is not sedentary time. So we do know that there's health benefits to it. Are they the same health benefits as getting on the treadmill for 20 minutes? Well, we don't know that, right? But we do know it does relate to health outcomes. It is good for you. So yeah, I think we can say there is research behind that. And I like what you're saying a couple of ways, because it deals with the sort of rigidity piece that I alluded to earlier, which is like exercise can only be this thing and it has to be for this long, right? Loosening up of that association, because actually just walking up and down the stairs for 5 minutes is actually really good for you. People don't think that, and they won't often don't do that, but it's true. But what you're saying goes well beyond that, because it's saying, how can you integrate this into your life? Because if one of your concerns is when you're spending time exercising, you're not with your kids, then like, how can you arrange your life, take control of your life, arrange your life in a way that you're doing both things at the same time? I think that's awesome. I think that's a really good way of looking at it. Now, different people are going to have different degrees of cooperation from the people in their life, but it's definitely worth trying to make changes in and trying to integrate so that you're not having to cut something out of your life to get this healthy benefit.
So, what if you're in a position where you want to be more physically active, but your family member doesn't, your partner doesn't? How do we change other people?
Man, I run far away from that one. I always encourage, whether it's around food or activity, for people to have, you know, try to have a meaningful conversation about it with the people immediately in their life, right? This is what I'm doing. This is kind of why I'm doing it. I'd love to have you involved in it. I think everyone should have those conversations. And also, I think there's potentially more potential for harm than good if you're trying to force that person in. Because, you know, I, as a clinician, I'm not trying to force anyone to do anything, because I know that doesn't work. I kind of run very far from that, and I do think it's unfortunate, but people are going to vary to the degree that they're getting receptive feedback about that. And of course, you have the other issue. This often relates more to weight than it does physical activity, where a lot of people encounter people in their lives that aren't supportive of them making healthy changes.
Mm-hmm.
And largely that's because I think people see people making healthy changes makes them feel bad about themselves for not doing the same thing. So you might run into not only people who aren't going to participate, but who are kind of actively undermining. And
Yeah.
that's unfortunate, but it's a thing that happens in the world of health behavior change. I think it's really hard in terms of dealing with that, because that just provides an extra barrier now that you have to deal with. It provides more of that internal stuff that we were talking about earlier that can kind of get in the way of making healthy change and sticking with it. So yeah, I think that's a particularly hard issue, though, because I don't think there's a whole lot you can do to change people other than to just be really open and honest about what you're doing and why you're doing it and how that you'd like them involved in it. At
Yeah.
that point, you've done everything you can do, and then it's
Mhm.
like up to them.
Yeah. And finding people that do support and encourage and are on board with being a healthy deviant or whatever you want to call it with you,
Mm-hmm.
that whether that's an online community or an in-person community, it doesn't have to be within your family or in your
Mm-hmm.
immediate environment. That you can, there's plenty of people out there that when you get hooked into that group, and it's an encouraging, positive group around movement, whether it's running clubs or exercise groups or walking groups or hiking groups or trail maintenance people. I mean, and then that can be a place where you get that need met. And you may not get it met within your household. You can't
Right.
get every need met by your partner or by your kids or by your friends even. Sometimes you have to go
Right.
seek those places out.
No, I
Yeah.
think that's it. I think that's great advice. Yeah. I mean, ideally, you could get some of those needs met in the household, but you're right. Sometimes if you can't, you need to go find a place where you can. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, what would you say is your biggest advice for folks that are wanting to develop better health behaviors in the new year, sustainable ones, and make it something that becomes a lifestyle for them?
I would definitely take a slow and steady approach. So if you're, let's just stick with physical activity. Start small, because I think a lot of people think I got to go from 0 to 100 on this and somehow be like a super exerciser in no time. And I think what the literature would show is like the best thing to do is to just really set very small attainable goals up front, right? So like you don't go from 0 minutes a week to 300 minutes a week. You say, this first week, can I exercise for 10 minutes 3 times or something like that, right? I would frankly start keeping a very brief journal around just checking in with your body and how you feel over time, because the benefits of regular activity don't kick in right away. In fact, if you're not an exerciser, the first few weeks of that are often not going to feel great. So you want to give it a little bit of time, work up slowly, and then start to check in maybe around 3 or 4 weeks. How am I feeling? How am I feeling in different areas of my life? How am I feeling when I wake up? How am I feeling at work? What am I noticing about my interactions with my spouse and things like that? And just check in, because the most important thing would be to recognize whether this is providing something of worth to you. And I think once people can get a sense of whether this is providing something of worth to them, I think the motivative factor to keep going, if that's present, goes way up. But starting slow, extremely easy to meet early goals that you kind of increase over time, and giving it about a month and checking in about what it's actually providing for you and whether you think that's important and worth in your life.
Can I be a little bit of just a little bit of devil's advocate on the small goals, easy to meet?
Yeah.
Because I see that and I recommend it to people. And because I mean, it's so research backed, right? You want to set a goal that you can achieve rather than the bar too high and then you just feel bad
Yeah.
about not meeting it and you give up. And there's also something about exercise and movement that builds competency and makes you feel like I'm proud. Like part of what's motivating is you go out and you do something and you feel good about yourself. My son just took up trail running as part of his after school activities, and it's been this kid has never run. He like hated running. I hate running. I hate running. It blah 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 blah. And I've been a runner forever, and I'm so glad that he took up trail running. So like maybe he'll go for a run with me. But now he's so much faster than me. I can't even possibly ever keep up. But what was so motivating for him was that was a little bit hard. Like I did something that was a little bit hard that I thought that I couldn't do, and wow, I'm proud of myself. So I feel like you need a little bit of both. You need to have the bar so low that no matter what, you're committed and you're going to do something physically active. Pick a number: 3 days a week, 5 days a week. No matter what, 5 days a week, you're going to do something physically active, and pretty much anything 10 minutes counts.
Counts.
And
Yeah.
then when your motivation is high, you take on some challenges. So it's like bonus land. Oh, I ran for 10 minutes. Sort of how I approach my meditation. No matter what, I wake up in the morning and I go down and I sit on my cushion. Some days it's 5 minutes, some days it's 30 minutes, but the commitment is to sit. So I do
Yeah.
feel like there's something around keep the bar low in terms of the commitment, but there is a rewarding factor to challenging yourself.
I love that. I love that. I really like that approach. It reminds me of like advice you'll get about writing. Like you create the space where you're going to write, and then maybe sometimes you write and you don't write much, but then sometimes you write and you write a lot, and you feel good about what you accomplished. You could be a similar thing in that vein, but also relates to, I think, something probably that I haven't said yet that I do want to say before we're done, which is just if I've learned anything in working in kind of food choice changes and exercise, I'd say one of the main things I learned is that just there is absolutely no one size fits all. People are just so different in how they respond to different kinds of strategies and different kinds of changes that a nice approach would be experimentation. So like if you find that you are really motivated by hitting these goals that you didn't think you could do, then go with that. Because I think that's the thing that's going to work for you, right? I would encourage people to try different things, and I encourage people to pay attention to what they find rewarding and build on whatever they find rewarding. I think that fits in a lot of different healthy choice domains where, we used to take this approach of like, here's the things you're supposed to do, so go do them. I think what we've learned is like everybody's just very different and have a different combination of characteristics and environmental circumstantial factors. And you got to try a lot of different things until you find what works for you.
Yeah. And that brings it full circle back to evolution. That's how we evolve behaviorally, is the variation and doing lots of different stuff. See what works for you, select, and then retain what does. And then you get to be a mover lifelong. And then when it stops working for you, go back to variation again. Your life will change, your body will change, circumstances will change, but you don't give up on the commitment to moving your body or eating well. Like those are the lifelong commitments that you need in order to live in the environment that we live in, which doesn't support those things.
No, it does not.
Yeah. Okay, Jason, thank you so much for taking this time. I do want to give you a little plug for your research. Do you want to say anything about your current research? Because I know we didn't even talk much about that, or is there anything you want to?
I'm at the Brown Medical School. Most of my research happens through their lifespan health, and we have studies on physical activity promotion, but also recently doing type 1 diabetes management as it intersects with eating disorders. Doing some of that work as well. So yeah, we've always got a lot going on.
Good. Well, thank you for your work and for taking some of these barriers and challenges that I threw at you and just going with it. I really appreciate your flexibility and going with it, and get yourself in a better position.
I'm going to do that right away. Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
I hope you got some good tips today on how to overcome barriers to movement. And for those of you that are interested in this whole process-based therapy angle, movement is one of the biological factors that interacts with your psychological factors, things like your attention, your motivation, your sense of self. And as Jason Lillis said, no one size fits all for every person, and no one size fits all for you across your lifespan. Your movement is going to change over time. What I did in my 20s is totally different from what I did in my 30s and what I do now in my 40s. For those of you that are curious about how I move my body, I have a much more diverse movement diet, as Katie Bowman would call it, than I used to have. When I was in my teens and 20s, I either ran or I ran or I ran. That was pretty much it. And it became very compulsive and hard on my body. Over time, I've learned yoga is super great for my spine. So I incorporate yoga, little short sessions, but also try and get to at least one long yoga class a week. And I also find that being in person in a group setting has a big mood boost for me when it comes to movement. I also like HIIT training, and just recently picked up a HIIT training class again, which is super fun, going at 5:30 in the morning, maybe once, sometimes twice a week, where it's loud music, it's strong people, it's throwing balls, it's doing all sorts of crazy moves that I think that I can't do in my 40s, and challenging myself again has been really fun. And yes, I run, but I also walk. And that is an important part of my movement diet, as well as going for hikes with friends and trail running with my son. So whatever your movement is, I want you to try to use some of the skills that Jason and I talked about this week to break through your movement barriers. And here is what we talked about. First, we talked about environmental barriers and how to structure your environment to support movement. So create some open spaces in your home. Get rid of the coffee table. It's really not necessary. And if you have no coffee table, all of a sudden you have space to get on the floor and stretch or play a game on the floor instead of playing it on your coffee table. I would also recommend configuring your space so that you don't always have to sit in the same chair, have multiple different options for how you could work, and bring in objects that are new, sort of like I used to do with my kids' toys that evoke movement. So big balls, yoga mats, bands, whatever it is that would get you to move more in your home. Motivation barriers. Try the miracle question. Try this for yourself right now. If I could wave a magic wand and you were exercising regularly, you may have already done this at some point in your life, so you may have a memory of what this is like for you. How would it impact the important domains of your life? What would happen to you at work? What would happen to you in your relationship with your partner? How about in your friendships? How about in your fun, your leisure? And then how about your relationship with yourself? What would shift for you? And when you get that picture in your mind, you can start to uncover why it is important for you to move your body. It goes beyond just weight loss or shape or even health for many of us. Thought barriers. Change your butts to ands. What's one but that you have? And one that I often will say is, I want to go to yoga, but I'm so tired. Another one is, I want to exercise in the morning, but it's still dark outside. Change it to the and. I want to go to yoga and I'm tired. Acknowledging the and side of things and then continuing to take yourself in that direction. You can have both. You can choose both. Guilt barriers. If you have guilt about exercising and that guilt is unjustified, try opposite action. Do the thing that you feel guilty about over and over again. And either you'll habituate to it or you'll start to learn, wow, I can actually have a feeling and do something that's opposite from what that feeling is telling me. If it's unjustified guilt, then why are you letting that guilt drive you? Technology barriers. I want you to examine whether or not you could use your phone to be of benefit to you. Could you gamify your workout? Some people like to close the circle on things, or use your phone as a way to increase the reward of your exercise, whether that's calling a friend on a walk or that's listening to your favorite podcast, Your Life in Process, going back and listening to some of my 100 past episodes. They're all available for you. And then finally, behavioral barriers. Starting small, making small, sustainable changes over time. We know the research on that. Try it. And sometimes just go big. Go do something that you feel like you can't do and prove your mind wrong. Take on a challenge. Sign up for a race. Go do an activity that you've always wanted to do but thought you weren't good enough to try. Experiment. See what works for you. Okay, enjoy moving your body this week. I'll probably be posting some stuff on social where I'll show you some of the things that I'm doing to move my body. Hey, if you wanted to post on social and tag me, I would love that. I'm trying to get a little bit more engagement, a little bit more energy around this podcast, and you will see the fruits of that energy that I'm building up here in the next few weeks. In the meantime, enjoy movement, and I'll see you next week with another researcher, this time who's going to be talking about all of the good things for your brain that happen when you move your body across your lifespan. I can't wait to share that episode with you. Alrighty, take care.